I want to talk about chaos magic, but that's not exactly an easy thing to do. Not only because there are so many different forms and variations and branches and delineations that it's difficult for one person to keep track of, but it has a lot to do with a core philosophy that sounds a lot like everything is made up and the points don't matter. Now, hang on, let me find the actual quote here. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. Now, although this phrase has been made famous by the video game series Assassin's Creed, it actually comes from a Slovenian novel by the author Vladimir Bartol. That novel is Alamut. Now, this phrase, nothing is true, everything is permitted, is professed by the main antagonist of the novel Alamut. And this antagonist has this core philosophy that all beliefs, even God himself, is limited by the finite human mind and the physical as well as mental senses. And this really points at the core ideas of chaos magic. Now, with the idea that beliefs are constructs of the human mind, societies, and cultures, this really makes us beg the question as chaos magicians, what actually is real? What actually is truth? And what actually is belief? Most forms of chaos magic that I am aware of profess this idea that belief is a tool. Rather, it is the tool. And since there are so many different beliefs, those beliefs can be worn like a hat, temporarily, in order to get from point A to point B. And once we've gotten to a point in which we are satisfied, we can take that hat off and set it back down and choose to wear a different hat or wear no hat at all. But the question really arises, what if we do this with different varying magical systems? Now, in magic, we are using belief as a tool to get from point A to point B in a magical working. So with this general suspension of disbelief, being able to utilize belief as a temporary tool, what if somebody were to work with the Greek pantheon? They wear that hat, they utilize Greek magic, the Greek way of thinking, Greek philosophy, and ancient Greek religion to get from point A to point B. And then they can take that hat off because it no longer serves them. And then, say, something else comes along their way. Theorize that it is working with demons. Let's just say demonolatry. Somebody is now suddenly interested in getting from point A to point B. It doesn't matter if you believe in demons, but because of the magical systems that are implemented by other demonolators, you can learn about these magical systems, you can learn about it, believe in it with your whole chest for a temporary time. Pick that hat up, put it on, wear it, be completely immersed in it, believe in it wholeheartedly for a temporary amount of time. And when you get to a satisfactory point, you take it off and you continue as you were. Let me introduce this in such a way where it might be a little bit more familiar to a broader demographic. Take this crystal ball, for example. It is obsidian. Obsidian is a volcanic glass. In its original form, it is nothing more than volcanic glass. But if you believe with your whole being that this can be used as a magical tool, an implementation in order to divine things unseen, then you will be able to use this as a tool for divination and other magical implementations. And then once you sit it back down, it becomes nothing more than an obsidian crystal ball, the way that it was originally intended to be. Allow me to appeal to another demographic. Here we have a chalice. It is nothing more than metal, particularly copper, that has been wrought in such a way that it is a cup. It's a drinking device. However, if I use it magically, I am able to utilize it in such a way that I can pour offerings to my goddess Hecate, and by giving her this offering of, well, tonight the drink of choice is Captain Morgan. But with that, I am able to invite her into my space, lay her offering, and while we are in communion together, I have access, by her permission, to be within her magical womb of creation. I would like to bring up one last magical tool that's on my altar. The cauldron. Something that is very popular in modern and contemporary witchcraft. However, the way that it is used by witches across the board doesn't exactly resemble the way that it was used in its Celtic pagan origins. Initially, it was nothing more than a cooking utensil. And then later, it was used for various types of magic. As a part of the neo-pagan movement, and particularly courtesy of Wicca, the cauldron now has multiple different meanings, by and large being stripped of its original cultural roots. Now, I'm not saying if it's right or wrong, but it is worth noting that this has happened regardless. Are you starting to see now why chaos magic isn't an easy topic to cover? The ways that it gets used runs an innumerable gamut. There are a countless myriad of ways in which chaos magic gets utilized and implemented. And at the end of the day, operating under the idea that anything is possible, the imagination is the limit, which then suggests that chaos magic caters to delusional thinking, calling it magical thinking. The difference is understanding that belief is temporary, and when you need to take off that delusional cap to get from point A to point B, that's the time to set it down. Chaos magic embraces a type of thinking that makes a lot of other magical practitioners, whether it be witchcraft and folk magic, or high magic and ceremonial magic, everybody can agree that chaos make other practitioners uncomfy. Again, I'm not sure how to talk about chaos magic, but in my mind hosts a gallery of characters that I think might be able to help. And now that I've gotten all of this out of the way, let's introduce just a little bit of chaos.
All right, begin.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the show. I'm your host Charles Splasberry, and many of you might be asking, what the hell is going on here? As the host of the Egregores, allow me to attempt to explain. Here, courtesy of social media, is a world of imagination where the mundane, the magical, and pure madness wind up blending. Since we are talking about chaos magic today, allow me to draw your attention to the mask. Many of you witnessing this now have a predisposed ideation about what this mask represents. Could it be something to do with V for Vendetta, the movie, or the comic book? Could it have something to do with the anonymous neckbeards that like to spout conspiracy theories and find reasons to call you a sheeple and profess that they are better than you? Or could it simply be the reason that this mask exists to begin with? A fascination with the political character, the seditious, treasonous radical known as Guy Fawkes. Whatever the case is, that is correct for you. There is no true answer. And for me, this mask means something for me. And that is all there needs to be. Now sit back, relax, and attempt to enjoy the show while our cast of a magical motley crew try to explain to you what is chaos magic. And these are the ways that we ourselves implement these things in our lives today. And just remember, I'll be watching. Toodles!
Truth is what's transitory. It's human life that is real.
back, initiates and acolytes. My name is Ebon Bathory, Black Magician Extraordinaire and Sorcerer Supreme. Today, we are going to talk about the lowest form of dark power, and that is chaos magic. Now, to understand why people perceive it to be that way, we gotta understand, on the right-hand path, we have people that are trying to traverse their way across the cosmos and either return to source or become one with the Godhead. And then on the left-hand path, we've got individuals who are trying their goddamnedest to become their own Godhead, effectively becoming their own God. Then you've got chaos magicians, who look at both sides of the fence and say, that's cool and all, but I'm gonna draw some dicks on it. In other words, you could say it's elitism at its finest, in action. Now, you could say there are as many types of chaos magic as there are subgenres of heavy metal, but there are a few things that stand out above the crowd. First and foremost, you have the utilization of belief as a tool. Secondly, you have trance-like states, transcendental meditation, and altered states of consciousness. I myself am working my way into an altered state of consciousness as we speak. Now, the one thing that is nigh universal across all forms of chaos magic is the utilization of sigils, aka sigilmancy. Now, before chaos magic ever became to be, there was a dude by the name of Austin Osman Spare who was attributed as being the forefather of chaos magic because the way that he came up with the very pronounced and identified way of sigilmancy. This was a guy that spent a lot of time in dive bars, talking to anybody who would spend the time listening to him, as well as making his money drawing paintings and other forms of art with groovy ladies. Now, Austin Spare was also proficient in magical ways of thinking, and in his writings, it's nigh incomprehensible to try and sparse through his material, and it wasn't until the mid to late 70s that another gentleman would come along and write a book with one of his friends, and that guy would be Peter Carroll, who granted us Liber Null and Psychonaut. Now, it is within the first few pages of the Liber Null where Austin Spare's form of sigilmancy is written out in divine detail. Now I know not everybody in this economy has the time to read, so I'm going to do my damnedest to try and explain it here to you. Now that I'm well on my way to an altered state of consciousness, let's talk about the first thing necessary when writing out a sigil: declaring your statement of intent. Now, there are multiple ways in which you can go about this. However, whenever you are going about it, keep in mind, if you're not careful, there are some ways that it might manifest in unexpected ways. Say, I want to make a whole bunch of money. Next thing you know, you're getting hit by a car and winning a whole bunch of money from a lawsuit. So be careful. That being said, it is my desire to make money is my statement of intent for this exercise here. Next thing you're going to want to do is cross out all of the vowels from that statement of intent. And then from that point, you want to write them out below, all in order. And once you're done doing that, cross out all of the doubled letters. Then once you got that figured out, you're going to want to make space because these are the letters that you're going to be working with. Now at this point, there is no wrong way to make a sigil. There are some that are unique and recommended and oftentimes fit a formula. But what you're trying to do is take these remaining letters and draw out some kind of design using those letters that symbolize for you your original statement of intent, but is incomprehensible to anyone else. Now, once I took a few minutes just to whip something together, my sigil wound up looking like that. Now, if you take the time, you can decipher where every single one of those letters is actually somewhere in this incomprehensible scribble. And now what we gotta do is the funnest and most exciting part. we get to nut on it. Now, I took the time to go ahead and separate the sigil from the process of working, and there it is. And did you think I was joking about nutting on it? This is part of a process that we call firing the sigil. Now, to explain this, what we really want to do is to get to an altered state of consciousness in which we are looking at, meditating upon, finding a trance-like state in order to absorb this sigil into our mind. Some people will do this through meditation. Some people will do this by sleeping. But the most popular way of going about it is finding a way to achieve orgasm while focusing on it with clear and direct magical intent. And now that you have taken it upon yourself to charge your sigil or fire it, you can either literally fire it or desecrate it and let it go. But the important part about this act of letting go is forgetting about it. Because by letting go, we are letting the magic that we just cast work its way into the cosmos. And that is one of the ways that we can do chaos magic via sigilmancy. And if you think that's crazy, just wait until we start talking about egregores. Oh, fuck, that hurts! Did it work? Finally! Oh boy. I have a lot of work to catch up on. Oh, it is good to be back. Cold nights like this remind me of when I was a young and aspiring paranormal investigator. Even as a child, I was learning about ghosts, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. But there was always something more appealing about local haunts and urban legends. You know, we've got stories of all kinds of things, everything from terrestrial beings to extraterrestrial beings, hell, even ultra-terrestrial beings. But some things, as it turns out, are simply a product of sentient imagination. By the time I was conducting my own field investigations, I was well equipped with the stories of poltergeists and phantoms and general explanations for household hauntings. And yet, when I was a young adult, I would be first introduced to the concept of PK manifestations. Now, as it turns out, PK is short for psychokinetic, which explains why people wind up shortening it to simply PK. But those who know what they are already understand what it entails when you simply say PK manifestation. As the theory goes, when there are people living in a home, and some of those people living there are of a psychic or spiritual inclination, some of those energies wind up sticking around in the house without being cleared out or cleansed, as it were. And when there are incredibly, or even minorly, inconvenient situations that would bring incredible emotional stress or some kind of abuse in the household, those psychically charged emotions will linger around in the home and sort of condense and coalesce into a sentient mass. Now, if it wasn't for the psychic proclivity of the individuals living in the household, there really wouldn't be an explanation for these emotional masses of consciousness to gain their own autonomy. But as these things, these PK manifestations, grow in power, they can move things from the walls, knock things over, even pick things up and put them in a completely different location. And as it were, since there is some sort of spiritual matter behind them, they can be picked up with the typical paranormal detection equipment. Which is ultimately how I became privy to this particular type of haunting phenomenon. Now, in my own research, particularly into the occult, I would come to understand that PK manifestations are categorized under a type of entity known as a thought form. And other types of entities that are under this classification of thought form includes servitors and tulpas. Tulpas being a type of entity that I myself was very familiar with, being a paranormal investigator, and as a child being very curious about these types of things. Oftentimes, tulpas are what is posited as a way to explain paranormal phenomena, such as urban legends and inexplicable things that seem to have no basis in our physical reality, and yet in spite of that, continue to exist. Now, oftentimes when I had come up across the idea of tulpas previously, it was a way to explain the men in black. I guess it's a bit of irony that I myself to be wearing a black tie and a white shirt with a black overcoat as I'm explaining this. But as my research continued, I would come to understand that the idea of tulpas had been stripped of any and all of its cultural context, as it started off as a, let's say, meditational deity of sorts, if you will. In Tibet, there would be spiritual practitioners, typically monks, but not always. Multiple people would gather together in a group and meditate on a single thought, and out of this collective thought, in their imagination, together, this thought form would become sentient. Now, as it turns out, tulpas in their original context are actually very deliberate. So if this was not exactly what we were observing in the paranormal field, then I had to ask the question, what could it be? And that was exactly when I came across the idea of an egregore. I'm grateful that I left this somewhat easily retrievable this time. Now here we are, once again, off to retrieve one of my nightmares. Alright. Yeah. We need to pause the video and we need to talk a little bit about this book. Now, there's nothing wrong with this book, The Libernal and Psychonaut by Peter J. Carroll. I recommend this book. I pointed at it several times already so far on social media. I just think it needs to come with a disclaimer. So, if you have never read Libernal and Psychonaut, watch this before actually purchasing it yourself, or if you have read it already, this might help explain why some of it is a little incomprehensible. Part of the problem with occult books like this one is that they are written by occultists for occultists, which means there is a lot of occult language that gets used in these volumes. And if you don't know what the occult language is, you might wind up a little bit confused. It even says here in the author's note, right at the beginning, Libernal was written for the serious occult student and therefore contains some powerful rituals. It's for the serious occult student. So if you haven't already been studying and you're not already taking yourself seriously, it might not make sense to everybody. Now, I actually want to read out an example of what I'm talking about, utilizing one of the most popular talking points in chaos magic, which is the concept of Kia. It's right here in the Liber Lux portion of the Liber Null. And if you go just over to the second page, we can read right here. Kia cannot be experienced directly because it is the basis of consciousness or experience, and it has no fixed qualities which the mind can latch onto. Kia is the consciousness. It is the elusive I which confers self-awareness, but does not seem to consist of anything itself. Kia can sometimes be felt as ecstasy or inspiration, but it is deeply buried in the dualistic mind. It is mostly tapped in the aimless wandering of thoughts and in the identification with experience and in that cluster of opinions about ourselves called ego. Magic is concerned with giving the Kia more freedom of occult power. Kia is capable of occult power because it is a fragment of the great life force of the universe. Now, that sounded awesome and poetic, quite wonderful if I do say, but it might not make a whole lot of sense in spite of how wonderfully it was put to prose. Now, I personally feel as if history is one of the most important parts of occult study. That way we can understand a little bit of the world events of what was going on at the time and place in which certain occult schools of thought were being talked about and expounded upon. And I think it's really important to go over just a little bit of that when we're talking about chaos magic. Welcome back, class, to Internet Witchcraft Etiquette, where I teach you proper and respectful witchcraft as well as other magical practices on the internet. I'm your host, Jaquel, and today we're going to talk about chaos magic. Now, there are a lot of things that are misunderstood about chaos magic. First of all, people think that it has anything at all to do with chaos or being chaotic to begin with, when in actuality the chaos in chaos magic actually refers to the unlimited potential in the universe in order to utilize for magical practice. Therefore, all things found in chaos magic wind up being more or less a theory in magical approach to an individual's praxis. Praxis meaning the way in which we go about doing things. In order to understand this a little bit further, let's take a look at one of chaos magic's favorite phrases. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. Oftentimes this is attributed to the historical figure Hassan-i-Sabbah, who was also the main antagonist in the Slovenian novel Alamut by Vladimir Bartol. Though I'm not sure if Hassan-i-Sabbah actually said it, or if it just came from the book. I don't know everything. However, we can probably suggest that this phrase was made popular thanks to Vladimir Bartol's book, Alamut, because the way that Hassan-i-Sabbah is portrayed as the antagonist of the novel, he suggests that with this phrase, nothing is true, everything is permitted, that everything is sort of an abstract construct created by humans and their limited minds and physical as well as mental faculties. Therefore, if nothing is true, you can do anything with the beliefs of the masses. Now, chaos magic wouldn't technically be erected until 1978 when Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin would erect the Illuminates of Thanateros, which was the first order where it focused on the group work of chaos magic. Being influenced mostly by the work of Vladimir Bartol and the way that he depicted Hassan-i-Sabbah, as well as the works of Austin Osman Spare, they produced the idea of a theoretical magical praxis in which belief can be utilized as a tool to get from point A to point B, utilizing magical systems temporarily to bring about intended outcomes, figuring out what works specifically for you. And when you're done with that belief, you set it down. And there's a lot of people that don't fucking get that. And if you thought that I was going to emulate Sensei Salvia without looking at some comments, you would be sorrowfully mistaken. Let's get to work! It's not witchcraft or paganism, but it's grouped in with us, and the concepts are delulu enough to make us look bad. Now, I think this comment is worth pointing out because, one, it's in my comments section, and two, it isn't witchcraft or paganism. However, it's worth stating that there are some witches and pagans that take a very chaos magic approach to it, where they are either doing a magical working to get from point A to point B, and they are utilizing that belief as the tool to bring about a magical outcome. Or they are working with a deity temporarily to get from point A to point B, and if there are favoring results to that working that they did with said divine being, they might do it again, or if it's not their thing, they're just going to go ahead and walk away and not work with that deity again. And that's totally okay, that's totally valid. Doesn't mean that every time somebody does that it's chaos magic, but that is a very simple approach that is similar to chaos magic, which isn't different from what we do. There are some things that really peeved me in that situation, though. I agree that this is a problem, that chaos magic and pop culture deities getting lumped in with paganism/witchcraft is a problem, if for no other reason than the fact that it is misleading and brings about false conclusions, therefore perpetuating misunderstanding, which is why I spent so much time providing history and context in this video. But I want to ask you a very important question. How does it feel being a pick-me pagan? Because I want to point out that those who do not believe in any of this think that your beliefs are just as delusional as a belief in working with pop culture deities, which are effectively energy phantoms. So does it serve you any benefit by calling certain beliefs delusional because it crosses your threshold of belief? Or do you think that by utilizing ableist language, it is going to earn you brownie points from the others who give you a pat on the back for at least being less insane than some of the other folk out there? Either way, if it helps you sleep at night, good on ya. Lord knows I need a good old nightcap to help silence the screaming in my mind. And let's add a smiley face and rocket ship and post! And that was a quick lesson in internet witchcraft etiquette. I'm your host, Jaquel, and I'm going to sign out of here because I broke the seal already. So wait, you mean to tell me that we've made it this far in the video and not once did any of them mention the Illuminates trilogy by Robert Anton Wilson or Phil Hines' Condensed Chaos? There's going to be so many angry magical neckbeards in the comments. And I don't know who the fuck that Ebon Bathory guy is supposed to be. If I didn't even know any better, he's supposed to be a cheap imitation of me. Why does that name sound familiar? That's right. That was the alias name in the dedicated student of internet comment etiquette video. Now that I'm thinking about it, did they include the redneck metal elitist in that character? Oh, good God. Oh. Well, I can definitely say I've got my work cut out for me. And who the hell are you supposed to be? I've come to collect one of my nightmares. I'm sorry, what? Actually, on second thought, don't explain yourself.
So the tripwire can still be active.
Oh, is this the part where I'm supposed to go, oh, no, God, have mercy? I'm not sure what's wrong. Normally that works. Honestly, man, don't sweat it. Happens to the best of us, especially for a deity at your age. Now, if you'll excuse me, as pleasant as this chat hasn't been, I've got things to do, so I'm gonna get on out of here. Bye-bye now. Now, egregores, kind of like tulpas, courtesy of contemporary occult thought, kind of have been brought away from their initial context. Egregores were initially a way to posit an idea that the idea of a person or a celebrity could manifest externally from themselves. And the way this was explained, courtesy of my research, as a person exists in life, they have a way that they go about things, the way that they interact with the people in their personal life, the way that they interact with people in public circles and social gatherings, and based on the way that people perceive their external projection of themselves, people wind up coming up with their own ideas, their own theories, their own headcanons, if you will, about an individual, particularly people that are in positions of celebrity or political power or even commercial influence, if you will. Social media influencers, politicians, people that are at the forefront of tabloids wind up having an egregore about them. And these egregores are created by a friction of multiple people perceiving and then coming to their own conclusions about an individual who is then projecting their own idea of themselves onto the world. Now, this egregore isn't necessarily limited to an individual human host. Logos and brandings also have egregores about them. The Golden Arches have an idea about them when it comes to McDonald's, or the red and white logo of the Coca-Cola label also has an egregore about it. The Starbucks siren also has an egregore about it. It means something. People perceive it. They come up with their own idea about it, the way that that company will present itself to the public, and the way that the public comes to a conclusion about that. This psychic residue will become its own sentient, autonomous thing in spite of what people perceive and what the host projects. Now, even to this day, there persists this idea that if there is something that is of an urban legend variety, whether it be the Men in Black, or Mothman, or the Dover Demon, the Jersey Devil, hell, Slender Man for that matter, people will suggest that it is a tulpa, but I feel it is more accurate to suggest that these things are egregorical constructs. Because even though there isn't an original human host, there is an idea made about it. And by the way that this idea is spread around and presented to the public then perceives these things, and out of the friction of perception, these things gain their own sentience and therefore, to a certain extent, their own autonomy. Now, as a paranormal investigator, this puts me at a bit of a quandary, a conundrum, if you will, because a lot of the things that I wind up trying to investigate and listening to the experiences of others and getting my own hands dirty by putting myself out into the field, if you will, it almost makes me wonder if the entire endeavor has been for naught. Which grants me a bit of an existential crisis. Because you see, who's to say that everything that I'm chasing after isn't just an egregore? Think about it this way. To an extent, we can apply this even to ancient cultures and ancient traditions. There are mythologies written about gods, and by the way that people talk about these gods, and by the way that the religious cultist worship would be around these divine beings, that feels to me as if there's more than enough psychic energy lent to these deities that egregores could explain what they are. Now, personally, I prefer my gods and my paranormal phenomenon to exist in spite of myself, because this theory posits that we are the reason that these things exist. And maybe it is because of my own curiosity and what my place in this world is that I have to ask the question, are these gods egregores? Are the paranormal phenomenon also egregorical constructs? I'm not sure what to tell you, but with this theory, the possibilities are endless. There's nothing suggesting that, even for me, this is going to sound wild, fictional characters could also have their own egregores. Now, granted, they would be different from paranormal phenomenon as well as the deities of ancient cultures. because they serve a different purpose. Their function is different, which makes me think there needs to be some sort of classification and functionality of egregores if this were to be the case for all of these things. But beside the point, getting carried away from myself. If there need not be a human host anchoring these egregores into our physical reality, and all it takes is for an idea about a thing to be presented, and therefore the public to perceive these things, and out of that friction, a sentient autonomous entity arises. This means that there is a sort of energy phantom, a mass conduit of psychic energy on any kind of fictitious character. Which makes me think that things like Slender Man, for example, things like the Men in Black, for example, could just be egregores. And quite frankly, that makes me feel very small in this universe. However, I feel that's a conversation for another time. What's up, Chaos? My name is Brandon Licks, and today I want to talk about something that I think is very distinctly affecting our community, and that would be magicitis. Now, some of you might be asking, Brandon, what the hell is magicitis? Well, let me tell you. Now, I think there are a lot of people that are confusing magicitis with spiritual psychosis, because a lot of the tells externally are very similar. The problem is, spiritual psychosis is a mental health condition, not a magical condition. Now, what I'm talking about is something that others have called occult madness. And whether we're talking about occult madness or magicitis, we're talking about somebody who is deeply removed from themselves and from the mundane world, which is why you gotta practice grounding while you're casting magic, bro. My dad, Blondie Licks, former guitarist of the Crimson Lips, one of those 80s hair metal bands if you're not familiar with them, he suffered from the rock and roll version of magicitis, getting caught up in his own delusions of grandeur, getting caught up in this idea, in this daydream, living like a rock star without actually being a rock star. And that's what magicitis is. You are living the life of a magus, but you're not actually being a magus. Now, if you want to live the life and abandon your children like my father abandoned me, go right ahead, but you don't need magic or rock and roll to be the excuse, man. What I'm telling you is, magic is supposed to make your life better. It's supposed to help you progress and advance as a person as well as a practitioner. And if you're only being a practitioner and not a person, what the hell are you doing? So keep in mind, think of it this way. In chaos magic, belief is the tool. Why are you going to let yourself be the tool? And that was some chaotic wisdom from yours truly, Brandon Licks. Now, let's paint the picture. For a long time, there was a lot of high-end occult orders and societies that were very inclusive, members only, exclusionary to everybody else. You had to be initiated, you had to be brought in and risen up in the ranks, and a lot of this had to do with the elders in the order teaching people how to understand this incomprehensible occult language. Some of those orders include, but are not limited to, the Theosophic Society, the Ordo Templo Orientis, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and I would like to also include Aleister Crowley's own Thelema, as well as Gerald Gardner's Wicca. Now, over time, as the years went on, there would be people that would wind up initiated into any of these orders, and then rise up in ranks, and then realize, after doing the study, reading the material, going through all the rituals, and then just realizing, We're doing a lot of research on shit that's got nothing to do with this, and for what? There was a lot of smoke and mirrors that was being called out. There was a lot of pomp and pretension that once people realized this, that there was a lot of extracurricular research for little to no reason at all, these orders started being called out for their elitist snobbery. What people were realizing was going on was that the outside presentation of these different magical orders and societies really cast an illusion of grandeur. And once the people wound up being brought in and getting comfortable and earning their stripes, they started to realize some of these people are full of their own shit. And with that, people would leave because they realized the reputation doesn't hold up to what's actually on the inside of these members-only elitist clubs. There were a lot of people that were basically writing about and providing commentary on the fact that this is what was going on. The people that upheld these elitist members-only clubs really didn't like it. The people that were speaking out against these elitist members-only clubs started talking and getting together, and two of those people were Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin. In 1978, after years of talking together and exchanging notes and picking each other's brains, they established their own order, which was the Illuminates of Thanateros. And that part's important, because this Libernal and Psychonaut... I'm gonna act like that didn't happen. The Libernal and Psychonaut are introduced as an introduction to chaos magic. The problem is, it's talking to other occultists of the time. With Libernal and Psychonaut, as well as the Illuminates of Thanateros, chaos magic tries to present a stripped down, practical and pragmatic approach to magic and magical practice in general. But it doesn't strip down the language being utilized to be practical and pragmatic. A good example of what I'm talking about here, it is and was standard practice to shorten the names of these occult and magical orders into abbreviations. So, example, Ordo Templo Orientis is often shortened to OTO. We know that. The OTO knows that. Other orders know that. Outside observers aren't going to read OTO and know that OTO stands for Ordo Templo Orientis, much less what it is. And this book does the same thing by consistently referring to the Illuminates of Thanateros as IoT through the rest of the book. It's fine. It's good that they do that. Yeah, it would be a fucking mess trying to type out Illuminates of Thanateros every single time. But if you don't realize that this is what's going on, and it hasn't been explained to you, and you don't pick it up along the way as you go along, it's gonna be hard to read. All of this just to say, chaos magic is amazing and wonderful. It is incredible in the way that it looks at paradigms and archetypes and shifting through these different paradigms and archetypes, the way that we're utilizing magical systems temporarily, utilizing belief as a tool to get from one point to another, and moving through our magical will with these other different systems that have already been set up, established, and are being utilized in other situations. But chaos magic is dense to really try and work through if this is where you're starting. But this doesn't write in crayon. And that's what this video is. Writing about chaos magic in crayon. So before you motherfuckers come at me, keep that in mind. Somebody came along, looked at the magical systems and said, we can make this simpler. So I am coming along, looking at this and going, we can make this simpler. Which I think is the most chaos magic thing to do. Am I wrong? Ooh, you think I can get a brand deal with a shot like that one? You're right, probably not. Who here is familiar with role-playing? Now, to be clear, I'm talking about like LARPing and D&D and TTRPGs, not necessarily what you're getting into in the bedroom. However, if what I say here you can extrapolate some curiosities from, by all means, please feel free to go ahead. I feel like for legal reasons I need to say, so long as all parties are of age and consenting. Now, before I get carried away, I feel like I need to stay on topic. I want to talk about how chaos magic helped me to revolutionize the way that I understand role-playing. Now, see, here's the thing. So far in this video, I think we've talked about utilizing belief as a tool, talking about sigils. We covered egregores in excruciating detail. Let's bring that all together in one nice, neat little package with a cute little bow on top, shall we? Now, see here, the thing about egregores is they were not initially introduced into occult thought as a way to work with very real deities and fictional characters as if they are deities. The way that they were introduced into occult thought to begin with was a way to explain how we ourselves can embody the traits of various different things that are out there in the world. Let's try to think of it this way. Egregores are basically energy phantoms, sentient imagination brought to life, tangible and intangible, spiritual and psychic things brought to life out of enough people believing that the thing exists, or just enough people perceiving the thing in any axiom or medium at all whatsoever, then grants the thing some semblance of sentient thought and a modicum of autonomy. So in chaos magic initially, it didn't really matter whether or not these egregores were real. It was enough of an idea to think about something, whether that be a deity or something else entirely, to embody the traits of whatever it is you're thinking about. Now, others before have thought about this and posited this idea into occult thinking. But the way that it really got revolutionized was with a comic book artist by the name of Grant Morrison. Now, Grant Morrison is most famous amongst neckbeards like myself, well-groomed or otherwise, as a comic book artist, illustrator, and author. Now, Grant Morrison is also known amongst magicians like myself, well-groomed or otherwise, as a chaos magician himself. Now, Grant Morrison being a comic book author as well as a chaos magician, writing many whole story arcs for many of the characters in the DCU. DCEU, does it really matter? I pissed somebody off with that, doesn't matter. Grant Morrison presented this idea that comic books and comic book characters were the modern American pantheon of superheroes and mythological beings. That being said, I find it a little bit ironic that he himself is a Scottish individual. Pinky's out! Conversely, if we think of comic book characters in this way, we can then ponder and think about how we can embody the traits of Superman or the Flash or Wonder Woman or Martian Manhunter or Batman for that matter. Don't know why you'd want to embody Batman, but that's neither here nor there. And I will personally have you know that this is not limited to the heroes in the pantheon of comic book characters. Because you see, one of the problems that chaos magic, whether intentional or accidentally, winds up accidentally advocating for, As a KO, we need to keep in mind that there is a difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. We need to keep in mind the cultural and historical and religious context about the divine beings and the magical systems that we're working, bro. Don't be like my dad and take things out of context, living a life that you're actually not actually about, bro. Because let's face it, chaos magic is a theory of praxis to approach multiple different magical systems in order to wear them temporarily, being fully immersed in the belief that if you believe it with your whole skidussy, then you'll be able to make a magical outcome. But that doesn't exactly cut the cheese, because if you approach King Hades thinking he's the Greek deity of the dead, you're going to have the wrong outcome. He's not the god of the dead. He is the king of the underworld, managing those who are already dead. He wears the crown. He doesn't govern the force of death. However, by incorporating things such as comic book characters and the things that are within pop culture, how does one exactly appropriate a comic book character unless you entirely miss the point of the character or don't know the lore and don't know or understand or even begin to comprehend the backstory of that character? And that's where Grant Morrison comes in. Now again, Grant Morrison is not the first, nor is he the only one, but he is probably the most popular that I myself am currently aware of to popularize the idea of utilizing the things that are in pop culture in order to utilize the magical systems presented in those pop culture forms of media in order to bring about a magical desired result. Think of it this way. There are plenty of manga and anime that go through painstaking, arduous effort in order to explain that particular anime's universe and the magical systems found within. Think of the anime/manga Naruto. That anime/manga goes through painstaking efforts to explain how ninjutsu works in that universe. Conversely, the anime/manga Bleach goes through painstaking efforts to explain how they are able to leave their physical bodies and then go to the Soul Society, and they explain how hollows become hollowified, and how Arankars become Arankars, and how wizards become wizards, and how Zanpakuto are created and crafted. Now, this doesn't mean that just because you believe in it enough that you're going to be able to summon a Susanoo or inhabit one of the tailed fox spirits or whatever the fuck they're called and become a Jinchuriki yourself. That's not what any of this means. But if you are able to find a one-to-one comparison in your own magical axioms in order to relay it over the magical systems that are presented in anime and manga, then you too can go out and be an astral badass and start kicking ass the way that your own fantastical J-dreams have always wanted you to be. But we need to keep in mind that magicitis is always right around the corner if we don't keep ourselves grounded in the real world, bro. Or we can simply choose to think of it like this. When we are working with pop culture egregores, we are really getting to know the character, getting into the mind of that character, and with that, we call that character down and grant that energy into us to sort of channel it, and in that way, we are energetically emulating that character. In other words, we're role-playing that character to think like them, feel like them, to go about certain things the way that they would. That way we can get from point A to point B in the course of a magical working by emulating that character. It's fucking role-playing. So when we are working with a sentient, autonomous energy phantom created out of mass belief, it's almost as if we are working with it as if it is us, as if it is a part of us. But what if that character is a character that we created for ourselves? An original character. One that was created out of our own gusto and gumption. A character that we made for ourselves. One that we might wind up role-playing online. One that we might wind up cosplaying at local and national events, such as Ren Fair or perhaps Comic-Con. That character that we made for ourselves now has been introduced to a great number of people, and with that character now has multiple eyes on it and can become an external sentient force that is granted its own autonomy. I think this concludes the point that I am trying to make. And just remember, I've always been watching. Toodles! Oh, cringe. The fuck? And who the hell just entered my home? Somebody looking to inquire of your assistance, Detective Taylor. Uh-huh. And normally, my clients phone ahead. So again, I'm asking, who are you? I have gone by many names. However, I feel you may already be familiar with one of mine. And you mean to tell me that you're the Sandman? And suppose I suspend my disbelief. How could I help Lord Morpheus? I had come to the mortal world looking for one of my nightmares, and as it turns out, the nightmare that I found was not one of my own. And what exactly? What can you tell me of the entity known as Darren T. Smith? Oh, you've gotta be shitting me.